Welcome to the Climate Conscious Podcast, where we discuss all things sustainable. I'm your host, DAVA, and this week's special guest is Miss Dagmara Avanindra. Hello, Dagmara. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on. Super excited, and congratulations on your fabulous podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me. So Dagmara Avanindra is the founder and CEO of DAVA Energy Solutions. She's a Stanford University graduate with a Bachelor of Science and Master's in Electrical Engineering and Hardware Design. With a background as a hardware engineer, Dagmara now provides project management and energy advisory services in the Caribbean and North America. She works with regulators, governments, private sector, and knowledge centers to execute utility-scale energy projects. So Dagmara and I met through the WIRE network. That's the Clinton Foundation's Women in Renewable Energy Network. So shout out to all the WIRE network ladies that listen to the podcast.
Go WIRE!
And I know they currently have a call out for new mentees, the new mentorship cohort. So I would encourage all women involved in renewables or with an interest in renewables to apply. Wouldn't you?
Absolutely. It's a great program, and maybe you can put the link to the application in the show notes for people to apply.
Yes, that's a great idea. I'll definitely include that. So Dagmara, you relocated from Silicon Valley to Aruba, and you shifted from hardware engineering to sustainable energy development. How was that transition for you?
Well, when I worked in Silicon Valley, which I'm really grateful for that amazing experience, which I enjoyed, at a certain point I wanted to see more impact that my work has on the end users, on the people, because everything in the end we do is for the people, not in thin air. And that is how I started to think, instead of designing graphic systems and networking equipment, what else can I do? I realized, of course, all of the graphic systems, networking equipment, and even all the apps like Skype, which we're using right now, and everything else depends on availability of reliable and affordable power. And since oil, and fossil fuels, although necessary but have a lot of adverse effects, it seemed like renewable energy, sustainable energy is the way to go. That is what I wanted to support. And around that time, 8 years ago, Aruba was a pioneer in the Caribbean to be the first island to officially set renewable energy goals. Now, Aruba set a very lofty goal to be 100% carbon neutral by 2020. Well, it's 2020 now. It didn't quite happen. However, at the time, I think there was not enough understanding of technology and its costs. However, those kind of lofty goals are necessary because they get the movement going, and now, as you're aware, basically all of the Caribbean islands have some kind of renewable energy goal with a lot more information and knowledge, and some of that information knowledge came from the experience of Aruba. So since Aruba set those renewable energy goals, and I've previously visited Aruba as a tourist, and Aruba is a really beautiful island with beautiful white sands and blue waters, and outside of hurricane belt, which also helped. I relocated to Aruba, and I wanted to get involved with a conference called Green Aruba, because I Googled before moving, what would I do there?
Right.
It turned out that Green Aruba conference was initiated by the Prime Minister's office, Prime Minister Mike Amon, which was a surprise to me because in Silicon Valley I was used to all of the private conferences, and I did not envision myself working for a government or politician. However, when I met Prime Minister Amon, I was really taken aback by how his motivation has been really everything for the people. All the motives were right. You can criticize people all you want about execution, whatever, but the motive was right. How do we help the country? How do we help the people? And one of it is, how do we make the island more energy independent, so we don't import so many fossil fuels. We reduce our dependence on the fossil fuels import and capitalize on constant wind that Aruba has, and of course abundant sun supplies. And as well as his vision was to make Aruba an example to help share information with other islands and countries all over the world. So when I found myself in that environment, I stayed working for the Bureau of Innovation and Sustainability for Prime Minister Ayman much longer than I anticipated, because it really felt like a startup environment from Silicon Valley, to be honest, very dynamic and very passionate. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I stayed there for quite a while.
Okay, wow. So back in 2011, 2012, Aruba set these, I would call it aspirational goals, to become 100% carbon neutral by 2020. And at the time, they were, at the forefront of this trust to become sustainable. I mean, it's so good to see that since then, most of the Caribbean, if not all of the countries, have come on board with this renewable energy and sustainable energy transition. And we're all at different stages of implementing sustainable energy systems. But at that time, essentially, y'all were implementing change. And that can be quite difficult. We tend to want to stick with our comfort zone. So it must have been challenging to some extent. What were some of the challenges you encountered while implementing change in Aruba's energy systems?
Well, I think change is always challenging, regardless what the subject of change is. And, it's kind of easy for people to be status quo. One of the challenges was, it's important to have the buy-in of the people and understanding of the people for the island's sustainability. And besides installing wind turbines and solar, it's also important to look at other aspects of our lives where we use inverter-based products, what kind of windows we use, what kind of insulation we have in our homes, and why would somebody upgrade their fridge or their air conditioner units. And so one of the programs we did, and I was involved with hands-on and started the program, is called Green School. And Green School was kind of a spin-off from Green Aruba Conference. The Green School was aimed towards Aruban school children. And it was formatted in a way of competition where kids were given 6 different tracks. They can design their projects, how to make their schools more sustainable. And that could be, what would it mean for their school to install solar? What would it mean for their school to install wind? What did it mean for their school to use hybrid or e-cars? Every single high school on the island of Aruba was involved in this. We were very fortunate. I went to every single high school and figured out what were their concerns to help them get involved. I have to give a lot of credit to the teachers, because the teachers who are helping with this program in every school, they did it basically on their own time without any pay, okay? So it was really amazing, the response that we received. And when we have this nationwide competition going on, what it did is produce conversation in those students' homes with their parents. Whereas the parents are sick of hearing, you should do this, you should do that from the government. Right. But when it's an open conversation with their children, just understanding the concepts and implications, I really saw a lot of people's minds opening. People were stopping me on the streets literally and telling me about the competition that there were kids participating in and the new insights that they received as a result of it from talking to their children, and how their lifestyles and their households have changed as a result.
Right. So the children were actually able to drive the message home much more effectively. In an earlier episode, I chatted with a school teacher, and we spoke about the importance of involving the younger generation in sustainability as a lifestyle. With the sustainable energy transition, It's not just about the technology. It's not just about a solar panel or a wind turbine. It's also about changing the culture.
Yes.
I think that could be even more challenging than acquiring the technology or even the funding to make the transition.
Absolutely. You bring up a very good point, Dorval, and I guess this is one of the big differences I see between the culture of Silicon Valley and the Caribbean. You know, when you look at Silicon Valley, all the success of the companies that we observe is built on the failures of the companies that came before. When investors put money in the companies, they expect for 9 out of 10 companies to fail, you know? And I feel that in Caribbean, sometimes no action is not punished, but mistake is punished. And because of that, there's a lot of fear to make those changes. And I'm going to give an example of Aruba. For Aruba to set those lofty goals and to try to implement them, there was a lot of action as well. Aruba was the first one to install utility-scale battery storage from Tesla. Now, this was a very challenging experience. There were a lot of lessons learned in terms of contracting with Tesla and support from Tesla. The battery, I think, came online like 2 years after it was delivered because of the miscommunications and lessons learned. So it was an expensive lesson for Aruba, but this was a lesson that Aruba could then share with Barbados, you know, which then was the second island in the Caribbean to install Tesla-based energy storage product. So that knowledge and the lessons learned, they went for the good of the Caribbean. And sometimes islands are afraid to make such mistakes because they're afraid of repercussions. So somehow when we're moving towards a more sustainable future, and because we are charting a path that has not been there before, there will be learning experiences, and we really need to be okay with that and welcome them indeed.
Certainly. I mean, there will be lessons learned from other countries that have done it before, other regions, but it's very important that we capture the lessons learned from right here within the region because we have our unique circumstances. It's definitely important that there's that sharing within the region.
To deal with a small island with a large company of Tesla, you know, whose yearly income may be larger than the island's GDP, if something goes wrong, it's harder for the small guy to assert their rights. That's why it's very important for us, for the Caribbean, to come together and support each other and be open with sharing such experiences, but not be afraid of taking chances. So somehow that needs to become more of our culture, more acceptable in our culture in the Caribbean.
Indeed. So did you observe any other challenges that you had to overcome?
I think one of the challenges that seems to be prevalent in the Caribbean is getting the agreement between the government, the regulator, the utility, the financing body, the solutions provider. You know, it seems like we all want the same thing, but somehow it takes very long for the projects to be executed in the Caribbean. And I do believe that in our core, we all want the same thing, and we all want the best for our islands. But somehow, again, I think there's fear something goes wrong, there's going to be blame to go around, or, you know, sometimes we get attached to a particular way we want to implement the project, and we get involved in the small little details and forgetting a big picture. That produces a lot of delay. So finding ways how to get on the same page and put all the stakeholders at the same table, the government, the regulator, the solutions provider, and come to a solution that's beneficial for the island at large is one of the challenges that I've observed. And one of the success stories that I'd like to share with respect to that is example of the island of Bonaire, which is in Dutch Caribbean, my neighboring island. And there, all the electricity is generated by a privately owned IPP, Contour Global, and then government-owned transmission and distribution company, you know, takes it from there and delivers to the homes and businesses. Bonaire, until the COVID hit, has a wonderful problem of growth. It's been growing fast for the last several years. Mm-hmm. So the loads have been increasing, and they have to figure out how to produce more electricity in in the most sustainable way. And Contour Global has been my client for a couple of years. I'm really proud how they've been able to solve this. You know, there's a temptation always to do like a short-term solution to put a Band-Aid on the problem.
Yes.
You know, and then we stagnate and stay there. However, they came up with a solution to introduce more wind, more solar, energy storage, and using the renewables, increase the generation capacity on the island, and also using the energy storage, stabilize the production of the existing fuel oil-based generator so that wind is used as a base load, and then storage also mitigates the operation of these gensets so they are run at the most optimal way. That means using less oil, and that's also resulting in low-cost energy. And so Bonaire is the first island, to my knowledge, to have no blackouts since summer 2016, so that's 5 years, that reduced the cost of energy production while increasing renewable penetration. And that is something all of the islands strive for. It was a very windy road, because, you know, even when the energy producer on the island is privately owned, they're still very heavily regulated. And because Bonaire is a province of Holland, of the Dutch kingdom, not only they have to answer to the local Bonairean government, they also have to answer to the government in Holland, which is not always aware of challenges particular to generating electricity in small island conditions. Right. So the challenge was to make sure that everybody understood. Contour Global, Web Bonaire, which is the government-owned T&D company, the government of Bonaire, the regulator, and the Ministry of Energy in Holland, everybody had to get to the same table to solve this issue. And they were able to come together and get over the temptation of doing a short-term plug solution, but do it in the right way to position Bonaire for future growth and the future energy expansion when we pick back up after the COVID depression. In terms of load, you know, additional generation will be done with solar and wind expansion. Those plans are already in the works.
From what you have just said, it highlights the importance of having all these various stakeholders on board. I mean, when we speak about energy projects, we speak about utilities, we have the IPPs, we have the government, we have the regulators, we have solution providers like yourself, but we also have the consumers. How do they come into this conversation?
Thank you so much for bringing it up, because in the end, the reason we have IPPs, utilities, and regulators, we really do it all for the consumers, right? We're there to support the people of our islands. That's the reason why this whole entire structure exists, and sometimes maybe we forget about it, or there's some kind of a communication gap. So what I've noticed from working with utilities, Caribbean utilities particularly over the last few years, there are a lot of efforts made to make energy more sustainable and reliable. Are those efforts perfect? Probably not. However, nothing is perfect when we're trying new things. So there are a lot of efforts made. However, what I noticed from the consumers, who I'm also a consumer, my friends, my acquaintances, you know, they see a utility as sort of a big brother, somebody they work for, because such a large part of their paychecks goes to the utility. And what they see mostly is the bills, and they see the blackouts and brownouts, service interruption. And so there's this huge divide between what is happening in the utility versus what is being shared with the public. You know, that creates a lot of problems, because when you're a utility and when you're heavily regulated and you need to implement changes, because renewable energy is not free. There's a lot of misconceptions. We think, you know, solar panels are free. They're not free, because, you know, you need to convert AC energy to DC energy. You need to make sure the island network can support a certain amount of renewable energy. All of that is possible, but all of that requires money.
Yeah.
There's no understanding among general consumer about it, which is understandable because it's not their area of expertise. So it is on the utility shoulders to educate and to explain and to share with the consumers what the utility is doing, what steps the utility taking to make energy more reliable, why they're allowing only a certain amount of solar installed on the roofs right now. Because the perception is, this is done because utility wants to control all of the generation. And maybe it's partially true. However, if every, Bob, Mary, and Harry is going to start putting renewables in an uncontrolled way, it's going to destabilize the entire island's networks, and everybody's going to suffer. So those kind of educational efforts need to be done, and they need to be done not in the form of press release, which not everybody reads, but in a way that is engaging and digested and simple, and engaging posts, which encourage interaction between consumers and the utility. And that's why myself and David Gums, who is a former CEO of Angleg, the Anguilla utility, we are working on a project to help Caribbean utilities communicate with their customers to build a relationship based on trust.
Yes.
Because now with the COVID situation, this is apparent. We're connected more than ever, and we need each other more than ever. Right now with COVID, people in the Caribbean have much less income. Many utilities allow people to postpone their bills for 3 months. But what's going to happen in 3 months? Tourism is not going to recover immediately. So incomes are going to be still much lower for some time. But utility will still need to figure out a way how to collect the money so they can still provide reliable and safe operations to the consumers. Because if nobody pays, utility will not have operational expenses to provide reliable power. So this is really a full circle where we depend on each other. This is if consumer understands what utility is doing, perfectly or imperfectly, mistakes will be made to provide them with reliable power. I think things are going to be so much better. I'm just going to give a very specific example so it's not too esoteric. So for example, right now on Aruba, as maybe on many islands, the rents, people are paying 0 to 25% of rent. Small businesses don't have to pay rent for 3 months, and actually many private people don't have to pay rent. And of course, mortgage is a whole other thing. So one of my friends, I'm going to give a specific example, and she's not the only one. Right now, even though she doesn't have to pay rent to her landlord, she's choosing to pay her rent because right now she still has full salary, and she's paying the full rent to the landlord, even though she doesn't have to. And that is because she has some kind of a relationship with the landlord of trust and respect. And if we have the same kind of relationship of trust and respect between consumers and the utility, consumers will then find a way to pay what they can when they can, really, because they understand that really we all support each other. So that's my point there.
I think having informed and engaged consumers is critical to the sustainable energy transition. So therefore, it's very important that there's a level of awareness and also communication. For example, one of the goals in terms of sustainable development is clean and affordable energy. Now, it will look like different things in different countries. For example, in Trinidad and Tobago, we have our indigenous supply of natural gas, which we use to power our utilities. However, a lot of the other Caribbean islands, they actually have to import fuel oil to drive their power systems. Although natural gas would be considered sort of a transition fuel, cleaner than oil, but still not as ideal. As you rightly said, renewable energy is not free, so we have to factor in.
Yeah. Pointed out correctly that the solution mix is different on each island because sustainability involves not just doing everything wind and solar 100% right now, and which is why we wouldn't do it immediately, because it needs to be also economically sustainable. And however, what is one of the interesting thing was when we were doing a study to see and to better understand what consumers' concerns are so that we can help bridge the gap between utilities and consumers. We wanted to gauge the utilities understanding their customers. Mm-hmm. Utilities overwhelmingly said the biggest customers' concerns is electricity prices.
Right.
We asked the same question to the customers. What are your biggest concerns? And this is not the only question, but we want to get the point of view of the utility, their understanding, and then we want to get the point of view of the consumers, what they're thinking, and then compare them. Now, This survey was done in early May, already during the COVID times. And to our wonderful surprise, the number one concern for the consumers was not the prices, but ability to install solar on their roofs. And second concern was transparency of the utilities. And only third concern was the prices. So it's very interesting and very encouraging that our Caribbean compatriots, thinking about renewables and sustainability in the big picture, even now in this moment of economic crisis, that I find very encouraging.
Indeed, that's quite interesting because you would assume that the main concern would be the electricity bill. We tend to see that generally that's the main form of communication between the customer and the utility, your bill.
Yeah.
In line with your emphasis on open and engaging communication, you are planning to launch a podcast.
Yes. Thank you. So the name of the podcast is going to be The Power Impact. And the reason I would like to launch it, for a couple of reasons. Of course, this is a changing world now, and the way we communicate at conferences or in person is going to change. So I thought it is important for all of us to create communication channels where we can reach out. And what I would like to accomplish with this podcast is to create more transparency between utilities and regulators and consumers, so that projects that make islands more sustainable happen faster. And again, this, of course, so I have a list of guests lined up now to have frank conversations with them about their experiences of projects in the Caribbean, what worked, what didn't work, so that we can be better educated how to make things happen. Because sometimes as I mentioned before, I find, generally speaking, we all want the same thing, whether you're a regulator, governor, utility, or anybody else. Generally, you want the same thing. You want better economic stability, which means reliable, affordable electricity.
Yes.
But we tend to differ in ways how we get there, and we tend to get a little bit stuck. So the point of my podcast is to help us get unstuck so we can be swifter and more effective in our execution, to bring this well-being to us a little bit faster, or a lot faster.
Well, I'm really looking forward to your podcast because I think there should be more sharing throughout the region. As we are all at different stages of our sustainable energy development, we don't each have to reinvent the wheel. We can definitely learn from what went well and what didn't go so well in all of the projects that are being implemented throughout the region.
Indeed. I just wanted to emphasize the point. I want to give one example. Last year during, I believe it was Cadillac Renewable Energy Conference, and there was and at the conferences, of course, we also share our best experiences, which is also valuable. But everybody makes mistakes, and that tends to be kind of swept under. But there was one presentation. It was a solar project on one of the islands from St. Vincent, and that project was like heavily delayed. It had a gazillion of problems. Now, but those problems were shared during the presentation. Let me tell you, I'm going to say that was, if not the most, one of the most popular sessions of the conference. The amount of questions that the speaker received was insurmountable. Everybody wanted to know, and there was no judgment in anybody's questions because everybody was facing something similar. And really, we need to realize that sharing such experiences, you provide so much value.
Indeed. In Trinidad and Tobago, the government recently announced that they are awarding a utility scale RE project to Shell and BP, two of the major oil and gas players in the country. So we are now at the stage of implementing utility scale RE, whereas this has been done by a number of other countries in the region. We need to tap into these learnings, tap into what went well, what didn't go so well, what we should look out for, so that we don't repeat the same mistakes.
Exactly.
So, Dagmara, we are in the time of COVID-19, and it has disrupted life as we know it. What is your post-COVID outlook for sustainable energy in the region?
I am very hopeful, actually. And, if you ask me that question maybe in April, maybe I would say I'm not sure. It can go either way. We can either fall back on fossil fuels and not invest in any more renewable projects, or we can realize this is just a temporary dip. And as we know, sometimes we fall into like these Band-Aid solutions, which tend to get stuck. However, doing the multi-island survey of the consumers who are still supporting renewable energy development and putting it paramount over the utility bills, even right now in this time of, crisis, COVID crisis, makes me very hopeful, especially when we bridge the divide between utilities and consumers, and when utilities see they're fully backed by consumers to continue with renewable proliferation even during this time. I think we're going to be in a much better position post, after this whole crisis passes. So I have a lot of optimism for laying tracks now for more renewable projects to be more prevalent post-COVID.
We need that optimism moving forward. I'm really happy to get your perspective on sustainable energy in the Caribbean, because I recognize that you not only implement change and implement the transition, but you also made that change yourself, personally and professionally, by pivoting from hardware engineering into renewables. So what would you say to an individual that is considering making such a transition into the world of sustainable energy?
Well, my advice would be to such a person is follow your gut and follow your heart. Because for me, I have to tell you, this was not an easy transition. Every single person I knew told me I was crazy, leaving Silicon Valley and going to a small island of Aruba. What are you doing? There's so many more opportunities in Silicon Valley, and maybe to the degree it's true. However, this was, I felt, was my calling. I feel I made a transition because there's a real opportunity to help the islands to be more energy independent, and for those islands then set a further example for the world. So to me, it is clearly the right thing to do. So my advice to anybody who is kind of considering any type of transition: what is the right thing to do? What is the right thing to do for you? So, for example, if you're a teacher, if you're an educator, maybe you create more programs that make your students aware of sustainability efforts that they could make. So do it in a way that resonates with your true nature. I guess that would be my advice.
Thank you for that great advice, Dagmara. So where can listeners connect with you?
You can contact me via my website, which is davaenergy.com, DAVA energy.com, one word. You can find me on Instagram at dagmara.ava, and on LinkedIn, of course, Dagmara Avanindra.
And we'll also be looking out for the Power Impact, your podcast.
Yes, thank you. I'm very excited about it.
So thank you so much, Dagmara. We had such a very insightful discussion covering sustainable energy in the region. And you highlighted the importance of, looking at it as a long-term solution, as well as building relationships among all the stakeholders, including the customer. You have started a transition in the region, and we look forward to the momentum building as we go forward, even in the midst of COVID-19.
Indeed, this is a perfect moment for us to come together, because this COVID highlights how much we all depend on each other and need each other, and need to put the right long-term solutions in the tracks now.
Certainly. Thank you, Dagmara.
Thank you for having me at your podcast. Really great speaking with you.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please share and leave a review. Connect with the Climate Conscious Podcast on social media at The Climate Conscious. Thank you for listening. Bye.